Welcome to NASPA 2020. Today I'm here to present a project that was done in coordination with myself and Thelma Horn at Miami University that's really looking at variable and person-centered analyses and investigating the passion-perfectionism relationship, and we did that in adolescent athletes. First, it's important to examine a brief background on passion and perfectionism. Passion is what we would say is a strong inclination toward an activity that an individual likes, that they find important, and in which they invest time and energy. We would say that this is an internalized form of motivation, where you're motivated for anything that you're going to engage in, whether it's high or low, intrinsic or extrinsic. What we'd say about passion is it's really you're developing some special piece of your identity into that activity, and so it's very much more an internalized form of motivation. We know for passion it can internalize into either a harmonious or obsessive passion, largely dependent on the contingencies associated with it. For those individuals who have an autonomous internalization, it's usually seen as harmonious, and for those who see it more as a controlled internalization, we see those individuals develop more of an obsessive passion. When we're talking about perfectionism, this is really the idea of compulsive striving for flawlessness. And more research recently has identified that there's more adaptive and maladaptive forms of perfectionism. When we talk about adaptive forms of perfectionism, this is really imposing exceptionally high standards for oneself and putting forth maximal effort in pursuit of these goals. This is really perfectionistic strivings. This is high personal standards and organization. When we talk about maladaptive, this is much more imposing high standards for oneself, but then also adding that overly critical of performances and creating inflexible standards. This is really perfectionistic concerns. This is concern over mistakes, perceived parental and coach pressure, and then doubts about actions. With that foundation there, it really leads us to our study purpose. And what our study purpose is to really investigate the relationship between sport passion and sport perfectionism in both variable-centered and then in more participant-centered ways. Our sample for the study is 243 adolescent high school athletes with a mean age of 16.64, with a number of sports represented, high school and club level experiences. When we discuss variable center results, what we see is that the individuals in this sample really had high levels of harmonious passion and moderate levels of obsessive passion, which is not uncommon in the literature. Additionally, when we look at perfectionism, we see that individuals overall had high levels of personal standards and organization, and then more moderate levels of concern over mistakes, parental and coach pressure, and then doubts about actions. With these, we ran a multivariate multiple regression where we looked at the harmonious and obsessive passion predicting those levels of perfectionism. And what we saw was two significant functions. In the first function, we saw both harmonious and obsessive passion predicted organization and personal standards, those two more positive aspects of perfectionism, but also predicted concern over mistakes and perceived parental pressure. In this first function, it explained the majority of the variance, which was 19.78%. In the second function, which again was significant but only explained an additional 1.4% of the variance, we saw that harmonious passion was actually inversely related and obsessive passion was positively related to doubts about actions, perceived coach pressure, perceived parental pressure, and concern over mistakes, really the maladaptive forms of perfectionism. When we looked at the more person-centered analysis, we used both hierarchical and non-hierarchical cluster techniques to determine the best cluster solution. In this case, there were 4 clusters. In these 4 clusters, we then analyzed them, and we found no differences in perceived parental pressure, perceived coach pressure, or doubts about actions in any of these aspects. However, when you look at them, you can tell that the individuals who were very high on both harmonious and obsessive passion had higher levels of personal standards, of organization, and concern over mistakes than any of the other groups that were going forward. Additionally, when you look at those groups that had low levels of harmonious and low levels of obsessive passion, we see a decrease or a lower level of all 3 of those aspects. When we look at someone who has high levels of harmonious passion and low levels of obsessive passion, we see a positive trend where they are seeing less concern over mistakes, but at the same time, they're not seeing that same level of personal standards or organization. And then the low harmonious passion group saw increases in that concern over mistakes and then lower levels of the personal standards and the organization. So what are the implications of the study? Well, first, investigating both variable and person-centered analyses gave a fuller picture of results and gave us a better understanding of this relationship between these variables. Secondly, it might be that harmonious passion buffers some of the negative aspects of obsessive passion when both are high. Results indicated the more negative aspects of perfectionism without the positives occurred when harmonious passion was low. Further, obsessive passion, although typically seen as negative, might be necessary for high levels of achievement. We should not ignore that obsessive passion has been linked to negative outcomes, but we need to consider those aspects were investigated without considering a person-centered approach. And harmonious passion might actually serve as a buffer for many of the negative outcomes of obsessive passion. This deserves further study and should be looked at further.